In this episode, we're going to be talking about snapshots and how you can be using this to amp up your visualization and clarity of where you're going, and also relax and stop stressing about the one thing you're currently trying to create. You ready? Let's do it. Hello, you are listening to the Love Your Life as a Performer podcast. I'm Kelly Youngman, and I am the life coach for performers. I help actors, singers, and dancers love themselves and their lives way more. So keep listening to learn how you can love your life both on and off the stage. Welcome back to episode 93 of the Love Your Life as a Performer podcast. I am just coming off of our first call for the Anything and Everything Mastermind, and holy wow, that was just pure passion, alignment, openness in a way that I could not have anticipated. And in some ways, it was completely created, but it completely surpassed every single one of my expectations. And I cannot wait for this room to continue to blossom. What I wanted to talk about today on the podcast is the idea of snapshots. And I mentioned it last week, and I wanted to dive into it deeper because it did even come up on our momentum call this week as well, is that when we are really focused on manifesting one specific thing without realizing, sometimes we can dive into being in the frequency of the problem. We can be in the energy of trying to fix, trying to solve, trying to research, and I don't know, like we just get stuck in the space of addressing the issue, whether the issue is air quote issue, right? Whether it's dealing with a family member or, a relationship or your frequency around debt or money. No matter what it is, lack of auditions, literally no matter what it is, if we're focused on the unwanted, it makes it really hard to be in a space of openness, relaxation, and ease that allows us to receive what we've been asking for. And I've been sharing this concept with my clients and with some of my friends, and it's really powerful. It takes us out of this idea of one manifestation being on the pedestal and really allows us to start looking at what comes next and what comes next. And so I realized I also just jumped right in, and I didn't really ease us into the topic, but hey, time is precious, and let's just go for it. Okay. So I want you to imagine that your life, right? Like if you open your phone right now, you can see your photo albums, right? Despite the terrible update to our phones that has been so fun to complain about, where everything feels lost and acclimating to a new system, a new update. When really, that in itself is a whole metaphor for life. Life is constantly refreshing. Upgrades are constantly happening. And if we resist them, we're just prolonging our own discomfort versus embracing what's new and giving ourselves permission to have a little bit of a learning curve, right? Because who's to say that this way can't be better, even though it's something that we're not familiar with? Anyways, not to digress, but we can look back in our photo albums and we can see images, snapshots, memories of the past. Using this idea of snapshots, it's going forward into the future. And instead of waiting to see what happens, actually planting the idea of what comes next. What is the manifestation after the manifestation? So for example, if you're manifesting your Broadway debut, we can sometimes get to a space where we are gripping it so tightly, and that thing becomes important because it matters and it is important. But when we're in the frequency of wanting that thing so badly, or getting sort of anxious or worried or experiencing any kind of urgency to get there, like a lot of hurry, even though we have our energy and our intention set on this thing we would like to experience, the frequency is not aligned with having it, right? It's actually sometimes we're emanating or we're ruminating on the fact that it isn't here yet, right? So snapshots get to be a tool for you to imagine the camera roll after that happens. It's taking, again, that one thing that feels so important, whether it's getting married or, making the Broadway debut or being out of debt, whatever it is. If that thing is feeling like the end point, it's going to like sort of clog up the energy because we're constantly looking at where is it? Is it here yet? Is it here yet? Where is it? Versus if we're utilizing snapshots, it's like really creating crystal clear images, not only for your brain, but for the universe to co-create and line those experiences up. It's almost like creating a mental attachment or a mental vision board that we then texturize and experience. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But so you want to be thinking about, if you did book your Broadway debut and you knew that it happened, what would the next 3 images be? Would it be like a FaceTime recording of you calling your loved ones, your family members? Would it be you outside of a theater holding up your binder? Would it be you backstage or signing autographs the first night after your debut? What are those snapshots? And then, like, there's so many ways. I'm going to expand upon this in a second, but it's like, that's the gist of it, right? And I feel like this is so powerful, and I've been using it with clients in so many different ways. But think about like maybe someone that, whether it's a brother, a sibling, your kids, that you are maybe feeling some friction around. Again, if we're so attached to the idea that it's a broken relationship or there's struggle, or, one of our friends was talking about how they were like researching estranged relationships and kind of wanting to like feel supported in that. It's not good, bad, right, or wrong. But with my experience as a coach and with aligning to the frequency, like it's just so clear to see when we're on the unwanted topic versus the opposite end of the stick, which is what we actually want to experience. Our brains are always going to look at what we're not satisfied with and have a lot of ease going down that train of thought, that train of thinking. But when we're intentionally looking for and planting the images of what comes next, it's not always so natural. So this is why we do this exercise, to plant the snapshots, to also soften the grip of what we want to experience by taking our brain past that point, right? So friends of ours, again, were kind of struggling with their teenage kids and all of the things. And when I introduced them to this idea of the snapshots, it's like, all right, we know that there's some friction right now. There's some tension. There's some communication, things that are just like not feeling delicious. It's feeling a little crunchy, right? But instead of trying to solve the problem, what does it just look like after this has been resolved? Even if it's a year from now, 3 years from now, 10 years from now, I was asking my friend, what does that image look like? Is it, you having dinner together and seeing each other laughing and smiling together? Is it you taking a trip, just you and your sons, and like having this amazing experience in Italy? Like, is it them getting married and you getting to be there with them and like feeling close to them? Like, what are the snapshots? Notice how different it is when we zoom out and we're not so focused on healing this relationship and needing it to be different now, but giving clear instruction to the universe of what you're ready to receive. And I'll tell you that even after that, right after I had this conversation with one of our friends, when they were here visiting in New York, they went home and they immediately were like, Holy shit. I just had a dinner with both of my sons in the same place at the same time, and it was pleasant and it was close and we had great communication. There was understanding. So like, I don't want you to underestimate the power of this tool. Again, I was working using this idea of snapshots and images with another client. And similarly, like they were experiencing some friction with their sibling. And I was just asking them, what would it look like if that was already resolved? If that was already taken care of, what would be next? Would it be the image of flying them to set while you're shooting your first feature film? Like, what is the image? What is the visual snapshot representation of experiencing the thing that you want? Knowing that the air quote problem, the obstacle, whatever it is, right here, right now, in this current moment, that we have to be the ones to soften, to detach from, to let go of, to create space for the next thing, right? And I'm sure you're not surprised, but then this client was experiencing closeness with their sibling, increased communication, like their guard was softened, which allowed space to bring in the closeness. And then they also were like in talks for a new feature film, right? And I was like, oh my gosh, you're going to actually experience this snapshot that you planted and you created. So often we stop the creation point at what is and what's happening right now without taking our brain further and further and further for even the next decade, the next 20 years, 30 years. Like that's something we were just talking about on my mastermind call is like, we're not just looking at who am I being right now and what's happening in these next 6 months. We're looking at who am I becoming for the rest of my life. One of my clients actually, like we did this visualization, this meditation, and they had this clear image of who they were at 63. Like this indicator, this feeling of calm and peaceful and just like grounded, right? So again, this idea of snapshots is a way to not only co-create with the universe, but give yourself permission to take this one thing that you want off the pedestal. Because yes, this thing that you want, no matter what it is, you're going to get it. You're going to receive it. It's going to be created. But that comes from the frequency of knowing it's already yours. And so by taking our creative brain space to the idea of what's next and what's next and what's next, we just start making a more cohesive vision of our life, knowing that things can change. But again, we are commanding time and space, not the other way around. And here's the thing, you don't have to do this, but why wouldn't you want to? Like you could wait and see what happens and kind of just be like coasting or drifting or sort of like air quotes surrendering to what comes. It's not good, bad, right, or wrong. But I think that if you want to get further faster, because time is precious and it's valuable, and even though it's nonlinear, it's still happening. Like the reality is we only have as long as we have in this human experience. So why wouldn't you want to be crystal clear with knowing, right? Every now and then I hear like people will be like, yeah, but I want to just like relax and surrender. And again, this idea of snapshots isn't for a feeling of control or a feeling of needing to know or like forcing or pushing or demanding that it happens. It really gets to be from this playful space of like, what would I love? And like, what are all the things that I can imagine right now that would just delight me to experience, right? I was talking to another friend who is in the process of getting pregnant, right? That can feel like as a woman, as we're getting older, like really stressful or again, that there is like a parameter of time. That is a literal reality. But if we're putting pressure on that thing of like, oh my gosh, we need to get pregnant, but not being clear with the instructions of like, well, what does it look like? What's the snapshot of you? It's not only about getting pregnant, it's also about having a healthy pregnancy, like carrying the baby to full term. So is the snapshot you holding your baby in the delivery room and then, you know, is the next snapshot introducing the baby to all of your loved ones? Is it their first birthday? Is it holding their hand walking into kindergarten? Like, what's the image after the thing that you're wanting so badly? What does that look like? And I've been even implementing this as I'm but as I am wedding planning. It's so easy to kind of get caught up in the stress of right now of, oh my God, all these decisions need to be made. And it's like, wait a second. If I surrender, right? Because this is where we do allow surrender. It doesn't mean we bypass making decisions, but it's like, if I temporarily step into, and by temporarily, I mean always and only step into a space where I know that I have the wedding of my dreams, that I know what it feels like on that wedding day, and I can see what it feels like to be married to my partner, and I can see like all these snapshots that come next. Again, it doesn't change that I'm still going to take inspired action towards planning my wedding, but the frequency of needing to be the thing, right? It kind of just smooths it out. Then we're not like, I don't know. I think we experience like really high highs and lows and everything in between. And that's totally allowed and part of our experience. But when we're not like, I need this to be a certain way, like I need to rev up and I need to go at this full force. And when we're not like, I don't know, I'm experiencing like spikes. We're not spiking our energy and like really going hard and grinding and then burning out and then amping up and burning out. Like we're not letting our energy be so, I don't know, choppy is the feeling I'm getting. And if we're just like, wait a second, this whole experience is happening and it's expansive. And I can start imagining the snapshots of my life, even if it's air quote, not literal, right? You haven't met the love of your life yet. You can imagine the kinds of experiences you want to have. You can imagine how you want it to feel, what you want it to look like, the kind of activities you do together. You can start planning those images because no matter what, like the person you're going to end up with, like wants those same things, or at least is open to having those experiences with you, right? You don't have to wait to start creating the snapshots of your next season, your next chapter, and beyond. So these snapshots are literal moments that you can sit down and access and visualize. And we just want to start sketching them in, but then we also want to texturize them. So when you sit down to meditate or visualize or spend time with this image, it doesn't have to be for hours at a time, but the more frequently you do it, the more clear it becomes as an energetic output and a visual and a mental rehearsal for the universe to know what you want. So you can be doing this as you're walking down the street, or maybe you're on the subway, or you're driving to work. It doesn't have to be like a big thing, a big to-do. Of course, if you sit down and you're like relaxed and in a meditative state and you go into that moment, of course, that's always going to be valuable. Once you start texturizing the images, more things are going to come into frame, right? But if you don't start sketching, it's just a blank page. And again, not good, bad, right, or wrong. But if you want to speed up what you're receiving, if you want to make a decision, it's like, okay, if this decision is not life or death, what does it look like to trust and know, like, what's the snapshot after that? What's the snapshot after that? Another friend I was talking to has just been navigating possibly moving and timing that out with having a baby. And it's like, if we don't get stuck on the idea of moving, what does the timeline look like? What are the snapshots? Where does your intuition and your future self let you start imagining where you're raising this baby? What's the environment? Like, who are you with? Like, we do get to creatively co-create this with the universe and start planting the images, because whether or not you realize, you do know what you want. Okay, so texturizing, you're going to think about, how does it feel? What am I wearing? What do I smell like? What is the space like? You want to make it as real and tangible as you can make it. And you want to enjoy these snapshots, right? I used to do this when I was manifesting my Broadway debut. I would really sit down and experience the moment of getting the call until I felt real tears of joy in my body, till I was actually crying tears of joy, knowing that it's coming. And that's one way you can really amplify and utilize these snapshots and visualization to be crystal clear about where you're going. Again, even if it's just a sketch is more information for the universe than a blank page. And as you go, you can start adding more texture and dynamic. But this, again, is going to help you let go of and soften and stop holding so tightly this one thing you're trying to manifest. What's the manifestation after the manifestation? What's the new endpoint that you want to set? And maybe it's not waiting and like needing this thing to happen before you can decide what's next, right? You want to start implementing and looking at, if I'm visualizing my life and creating the trajectory of my life for the next 30 to 40 years, what's the next snapshot? 1 decade from now, 2 decades from now, 3 decades from now. It's going to just give you a different vantage point for your creation. So that's what I got for you this week. The idea of snapshots. Try it on, implement it, and I'll meet you back here next week for another episode. Bye. Hey, I want to invite you to get started, because if this is blowing your mind, imagine the impact of when we actually work together. You get to love your life as an actor, singer, or dancer, even including auditions. And if that sounds amazing, come join us inside of Momentum. You get lifetime access to the Performers Plan, coaching, community, and more, and I will be supporting you the entire way. Go to kellyyoungmanwellness.com/momentum to join us now.